What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Sit Down Saturday, and today we are going to be talking about the recent reveals. We're going to be covering the Fans Toys Cliffjumper, the Takara Cliffjumper, the X-Transbots reveals. There's been a lot of them recently. We're going to talk about them. And then we're going to talk about why they're coming the way they're coming a bit, because that's the stuff that's kind of more interesting to me rather than just talking about the reveals. I understand that talking about reveals is kind of part of the culture of this stuff, so I'm going to do it, and I know that people are interested in my opinion. I'm very grateful for that. But I personally don't find that type of conversation very interesting. What I do find interesting is the whys, not the whats, as much, to be honest. But we're gonna cover the pictures and stuff in order to kind of have a conversation, I guess, to base that off of. Everyone, let me know that the Runabout and Runamok was out, so thank you for that. And I mean everyone, every single person on the planet, I think, which I do appreciate. I gave a lot of people just green checks, like we're checking them off the list, check, just because it was so many people. It was the only way that I could respond in any way was to just send check marks, because otherwise I would have been on social media all day responding to DMs instead of making this video. But in order to get there, we do have to do the tiniest bit of housekeeping. Last week, it was interesting reading the comments. People are very 50-50, and it seems like the people that had the most issue with Kingdom were also people that are the biggest Beast Wars fans. Makes sense to me. I didn't like Beast Wars, so I kind of like this. It makes sense to me that if you like Beast Wars, you wouldn't like this. The same kind of goes for their iteration of Megatron, etc., etc. So all of that sort of adds up. Like, the math checks out. You know what I mean? And make no mistake, as we discussed on Nerd Rage this past week, I will never watch those shows again. They just don't have that kind of replay value for me. But in the sense of watching all 3 seasons, I found myself falling asleep or reaching for my phone with the first 2 seasons, and the third one I actually kind of enjoyed. And then the only other thing that we have to discuss is the MMC thing. I had the thumbnail wrong. I had to Sit Down Saturday skull on it. You know, stuff happens. Don't worry about it. It's funny to me that most people are kind of on board with that. Man, they're like, if it doesn't function well, I understand why you would be upset with this piece. And it's just interesting to me because a couple weeks ago it was a very similar circumstance, but the reaction was blatantly different. And that might be something for me to kind of think about and sort of dive into one day eventually. But yeah, I don't know. This seems like somebody else got a hold of MMC and put that out. I don't expect that from that company. I expect more. It seemed like MMC was kind of like away for the weekend, and their like degenerate brother-in-law who's kind of like in and out of prison, and he doesn't have his stuff together. He was like house sitting for the weekend, and he produced that. It just didn't seem like MMC to me. I'm sure it's a one-off. There's people that are in the comments saying like, well, it makes me worried about what such and such is going to happen. I don't think it's fair to view it that way. Having a misstep is simply that, a misstep. If you continue on that misstep, then you go in the wrong direction. But one misstep doesn't necessarily determine that you're going in the wrong direction. You can take a misstep and then get right back on the same path. If you take too many missteps, you kind of lose track of where the path is. Does that make sense? So I'm not concerned about any of their future releases. I'm chalking this up as a one-off misstep. And with that, I think we can get down to business. So a number of reveals have come out. They've all come out digitally, meaning on social media platforms or whatever. So there's a ton of pictures, and they're all sort of easy to copy and paste, and there's not too many of them that are like taken from people's cameras and stuff. So let's go ahead and take a look at them. So we finally are getting a Cliffjumper that doesn't look absurd in some regard, in one regard or another. Now, you can tell that this Cliffjumper is going to suffer from the same sort of backpack issues that most of them suffer from. However, it does tidy up much better than the other options. I think personally that the X-Transbots has been the best option up until now, but if this does indeed come to fruition, I think that this is going to take the title. It has those proportions that we love Fans Toys for. It has that sculpt we love Fans Toys for. It just looks the part. The alt mode is obviously going to include the skis and all that because you just can't make one without it. It seems. I get it. It's that thing from that episode. I understand. It's just the cost of doing business, I suppose. But the alt mode does look good. It looks like the cartoon, but I also just find it to be fairly familiar and reminiscent of the G1 toy. It sort of scratches both of those itches for me. But it is nice to get a Cliffjumper that looks to be made of this caliber aesthetically. I feel like it's kind of been a long time coming. I can't help but wonder if we'll perhaps get a Bumblebee out of this mold too that would be, or at least would have to be, different tooling. And perhaps it's not even possible. It's not really my specialty, but it would be nice to get a decent looking Bumblebee as well. But speaking of Bumblebees that perhaps aren't so decent looking, another Bumblebee that we're aware of is being retooled for a Cliffjumper. And this one does not look as flattering. But to be fair, it's already working with weaker DNA, which is that original Takara Tomy masterpiece mold for Bumblebee, which, as most of you know, was far from my favorite.
And I can't help but notice that perhaps BS is written on his crotch. And perhaps I agree. But this Cliffjumper does not look good to me. It suffers from the same issues that the Bumblebee did, obviously by utilizing the same mold. It also looks too skinny, like he should talk to his guidance counselor about things that might be bothering him. And the backpack looks like it's just going to be invited to the family reunion of whatever that feet situation is. And then, of course, there's the stuff of nightmares. He's watching you. Even the Fans Toys Cliffjumper doesn't quite understand it. And shout out to Cheeves, man. I don't know that guy. I've never met him, never talked to him, but that guy's on it with the kind of decos and stuff and trying to make it make sense. He had his work cut out for him with this one. And I'm sure people will drag me whenever this thing comes out and I'm like, look at it. It looks bad. And they'll be like, no, it doesn't. You don't even know what things look like. Bobby, don't know how to look at it, face. Would you look at it? Anyway, I'll tell you something that Takara is doing that I do like, and that is their Nightbird. Now, I'm not sure if I'll buy it because I'm not sure if I need this character, especially for $150. But it seems weird to me that with all of the third-party Masterpiece RC options throughout history, that we've never had one company make any sort of attempt to tackle this character by using that mold. And it works. I think it's quite smart. I think perhaps it's even more appropriate looking than the MP representation of RC. I think this one kind of works better. I think it's a clever use of the mold. It doesn't seem like a milking to me. It seems like, smart, little bit of fan service, good idea. Yeah, the alt mode is new and all that, blah, blah, blah. But, what are you going to do? I think it's cool. I think it's smart. I think it's clever. I just don't care for myself personally, but if I did, I'd be all over this thing. And then we have, ironically, X-Transbots kind of making the biggest noise these days with their punch counterpunch. And I am going to Google that to make sure that's that dude's name. It is. I thought it was. But we get a lot of options here. X-Transbots, I think, gave this all it had because it has been such a kind of fan favorite sort of recommendation, but request. So we get the kind of yellow chest version with the more human-esque face, clean, sharp, decent sculpt work. And like I said, it offers the more human-esque face, which I think most people associate with the character. I could be wrong. And then it also offers the more almost Prime-like face. That to me is a more of a fan service sort of thing, which is cool. And there's also changes there if you look to the shoulder pads as well. And even the chest. It's just a nice little attempt from them to really give back, I feel like, to the fans of this character. And then there's the blue version. Once again, clean, fairly clever looking, interesting stuff going on. The two different faces, the one with the more blue face, not to be confused with this blue face or this blue face, but instead this blue face. However, also they include the more silver take on it, which also includes a different chest display option. So really just an awful lot going into this, I think, for the fans of this character. Alt mode looks clean and slick. That's usually never their problem. They show the top-down view as well. Looks pretty compact, as well as some of the gimmick stuff with the doors opening and such. Those tail lights look awesome. Some really clever stuff going into this. It seems a lot of care going into this, it seems. And then the shot heard around the world, or at least the shot heard around my DMs. Thank you all for caring so much. It reminded me that many of you care. But they also showed off their Runabout and Runamok. Now, these bots look especially clean. However, it's my understanding that the CAD software that they use to design in lends itself to showing them in that regard, and that might not be 100% how they end up looking. There's some kind of final product, maybe a bit different type of situation going on with them, but nonetheless, this looks pretty good. And they're labeled as Fast and Fury, which is just in time for the 9th film, where it's my understanding that they go take a car into outer space, which is not my bag. They're going to be about 7¼ inches, which should fit perfectly into your Masterpiece collection, as we would expect. We get back views that look pretty clean. And one thing that was pointed out to me from Sam's Forge, which I found pretty interesting, was their alt modes are different. They both look good, and I think most of us would have been completely satisfied if the alt modes were identical, but they're not. They went the extra step and included 2 different alt modes to have a little variation between the 2 molds, something they didn't have to do, and they did. Very similar, in my opinion, to the punch counterpunch. So it does seem like they're trying to make people happy, which I can respect. Then we have Fury. Not a whole lot new to report here after looking at the previous, but looks good, looks clean, looks sharp. X-Transbots has been doing a pretty good job of painting their figures recently, so I'm sure it's going to be a pretty piece as well. The only thing that people are kind of talking about are how skinny these bots seem to look. I don't don't think this is really going to be an issue. It seems as though Fury isn't going to be as bad as Fast, at least from these photos, but I don't think it's going to be an issue. I think with some posing and stuff, it's going to work just fine. These cat images are showing these characters in the least dynamic manner they could possibly show them in, and I think that's the reason why they end up looking more strange. But pretty good representations of the G1 cartoon models, and as you can see, the G1 cartoon models also had that variation in alt mode, so very, very cool. There's also the difference in pelvises that the X-Transbots figures seem to match as well, so a pretty impressive reveal over the last couple months.
And that's that. And to me, what's interesting, I was contacted recently and somebody was like, do you think that X-Transbots is doing so many reveals to kind of put themselves in a more competitive space with some of the other companies? And I'll be honest with you, I don't think that's the case. All speculation, I don't know. He could be 100% right. I could be 100% wrong. I don't know. But I think a lot of this has more to do with the pandemic, the unprecedented pandemic, and that we used to get 2 or 3 big show reveals a year by this point, right? We would have had at least 2 in China and at least 1 TFCon, if not 2 TFCons by this point. The one in Canada, and it seemed like they were doing one on the West Coast and one on the East Coast in America. So they haven't really had that outlet. So the only way to really get reveals out is kind of to do it in a social media kind of way. And that's just an interesting direction to take. It's almost a return to old third-party roots in a way before they had kind of the outlets on a more mainstream platform. So that's been interesting to me about all of this, is kind of watching them move in a space where they don't have these huge kind of stages to present material upon. And as a result, it kind of trickles back down to your Facebooks and your Weebos and your Instagrams. And of course the boards. So that's my guess. I still feel like we haven't got enough reveals this year, and it's probably because most of these companies are trying to figure out how to reveal it. Still haven't got a Predaking from Kang Toys to reveal. My guess is because it doesn't work, but be that as it may, I feel like we're still behind the 8 ball in many kind of corners of the market as regards to what people are actually working on these days. But fingers crossed, we're able to continue into October and get a TFCon return in Baltimore, and I'll be there, and hopefully we can get some exciting news and pump some life back into this thing. What do you say? All right, till next week. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Till next time, take care.